Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Chavista Chronicles from Caracas. My name is Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Jenn McKinney and Luisa Herrera from the Democratic Socialist of America, DSA. Welcome, Luisa and Jenn. And they were part of a bigger delegation that came to Venezuela a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, I believe. And I just wanted to take the advantage, of their delegation, their visit to Venezuela, and ask them some questions about it. So before starting, I just want to introduce Jenn. Jenn McKinney is a full-time mom and chair of DSA National Political Committee. She has devoted much of her time to building mutual aid efforts within the organization. And Luisa Herrera is a community activist on the board of the DSA International Committee. She helped found Hands Off Venezuela Portland and devotes her time to international socialist solidarity and labor movements. Welcome, compañeras.
Thanks, Jesus.
Thank you.
Listen, we're gonna jump to the first questions because we have been having some internet issues lately here in Caracas. To avoid any delays, just let me read it. Please give us your impressions on your visit to Venezuela. I mean, on the interactions with government officials, but also your interactions with social movements, national and international, and local organizations in Venezuela, and also your interactions outside what someone said, the five-star hotels.
Well, first, thank you so much for having us. This was my first time leaving the country, and I went in with a blank slate. I knew about blockades, but I was able to see the impact of them and their effect on daily living. Our interactions with government officials were generally positive. We were asked just tell the truth about what we saw and what we experienced, nothing more, nothing less. We experienced a country that's taking coronavirus seriously. We were tested multiple times while we were there and before we left Venezuela. There were temperature checks and sanitization before we entered many of the buildings. You do not find that level of seriousness in the US. States were lifting the mask mandates pretty early on, while hundreds of thousands of people were dying in the US.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
and that's important.
I would add, definitely. I mean, I would add at least three people remarked to me that they couldn't believe that the United States had allowed 600,000 people to die. So it was very much a country that was taking coronavirus seriously. And on that same token, I mean, it's, you know, in terms of some of the criticisms, I mean, the coronavirus made cohabitation really difficult. It made sense to go to a hotel, especially one as large as that one was. We had people from all around the world for El Congreso. And it just made sense. That's just what adults do. In terms of interactions with other folks at El Congreso, some of the delegates, and then also, you know, with our time with just everyday Venezuelans, I will say, you know, as part of the breakouts for El Congreso, we had one just focused on education. There were various types. There's like youth and women, workers, environmentalism, that type of thing. I went to the education one, and I will say it was really important for me as somebody who has devoted many years to education in the United States, seeing the difference between being in a room full of people who understand how critically important education is to developing revolutionary consciousness, socialist revolutionary consciousness. And I will say that everybody in that room understood that. It was the topic, right? How do we continue to do this as a group of people from various countries? And so, you know, in comparison, I will say that teachers in the United States care deeply about education. It's not to be dismissive in that sense. But generally, the attitude is that kids need to learn. You need to get a degree in order to be a responsible human being, and really to be able to get a job so you can support your family. It's not quite the same as being in a place like Venezuela with a group of people like the delegates from El Congreso Bicentennial del Pueblo del Mundo. It was just really heartwarming, and it was illustrative for me to sit in that room where everybody understood that fact.
That's important. That's important. But outside the going to the 5-star hotel thing, did you interact with people outside the Congress? I mean, did you have the chance to interact with regular Venezuelans? And I just want to feel your impressions going outside, you know, the interactions with government officials and with delegates from other countries. Did you have that chance? I mean, did the schedule let you do that?
Jen, do you want to?
And what is the thing that impressed you the most about that interaction?
Yeah, we certainly did. We met a lot of people. We got to talk to a lot of people, ask questions, find out about their daily living. What impressed me was something that we don't have in the US. The sense of community that there is as a culture. You know, when we visited communes and they're all working together for shared goals, where they have political education built in to what they do, when they build intentional spaces for political discussion. All of those things are what we don't have here. Under capitalism in the United States, we are very atomized. We're discouraged from building community with each other. You know, if you need to borrow a cup of sugar or something, you're not encouraged to go to your neighbor and just ask. You're encouraged to go to the store or call Uber, you know, delivery to get the things that you need instead of building real relationships with people. And that's what I found it so inspiring. And so like, I loved it. Every second of that, feeling that deep, deep sense of community.
That's nice to hear that. It's nice to hear that. And did you manage to interact with people from political parties different than the government one? Did you manage? I actually met with Luisa when she was here in Caracas, and I was wondering if you managed to interact with people from the Communist Party or from other political organizations different to the PSUV. Any of you?
Yeah, no. So I tried with you. We tried as a delegation. We specifically asked. I'm not quite sure what happened.
Pedro Elser, right?
Right, yeah.
The guy from the Communist Party, yes. He didn't went back to you, right?
No, I didn't get anything.
Because I gave him your contact information. It's a shame because they have a critic position against the government. If you ask me, they has been moving, you know, to the extreme left. If you ask me, they are moving close to the extreme left that is very critic to the government right now. But I consider that it was important if some of you met and talked with those guys, because they might have, like, I don't share their current position, their current criticism, disregarding the fact that I consider that some of their criticisms are valid. But in general, their recent approach towards, you know, the government is something that I don't share. But anyway, I just wanted to see if you managed to have that interaction with the people from the Communist Party of Venezuela or with any other organization.
No, I will say I stayed a couple extra days and I met with various people, including yourself. And so there was a variety of opinions in terms of maybe who's motivating the type of, like the the coalition like APR, who the key players are. I mean, there's lots of different opinions on it, and I won't,
Yes.
you know, not sure. Yeah, we want to get into it, but you know I got some clarity. I've been, as somebody who's been an activist for Hands Off Venezuela, I have been in contact with folks who are in APR for years, and so it's interesting for me. I actually got, again, speaking personally, I was able to get. I've been getting APR narrative for years, right, from friends, and it was actually going to Venezuela was my opportunity to talk to the majority, if that makes sense.
That's
and so,
fine.
like I said, it's yeah, and there's no universal narrative in terms of what happened. I will say, I take that back. My experience talking to people was that it's exactly what you say. They're right, but the approach is wrong. That the criticism, some of the criticisms are valid, not all of them.
That's the impression that I have.
Yeah, but splitting off when sanctions have crippled 99% of your country's income is really not the best approach. So that was my personal experience. Jen, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add.
I think you covered exactly my thoughts. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, now I'm going to ask you the second question. And please remember that at the end of the interview, you are free to ask me 2 questions if you want. You are not obligated to do that. But the second question is, did your impressions about US unilateral sanctions and how they affect ordinary people changed after you visit Venezuela? And also in that question, I want to ask you about, I mean, if DSA have a position on unilateral sanctions?
Yes, DSA does have a position. I'll briefly quote a statement that we wrote in 2019. Quote, DSA categorically opposes any and all efforts by the US government to intervene in the domestic politics of Venezuela, unquote. And I can link you to those statements if you want to include those.
That's fine, yes,
you know,
please.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we got to see firsthand how the blockades affect daily living. We visited health clinics where they have difficulty getting access to medicine. We talked to people who talked to us about how patients with diabetes have trouble getting insulin. Other diagnoses, they're having trouble getting medicine that can keep them alive. And it is absolutely heartbreaking to see how the US government is, and this is their intention, to just completely try and decimate the people of Venezuela. And, like I said, I went into it with a blank slate. I wanted to know, I wanted to see firsthand. And what changed for me is just the depth, understanding the depth of the blockades, understanding how much it affects people. It's hard from the US to get that understanding because we are inundated with propaganda. We don't, if you have to really hunt out information, and it was life-changing to learn firsthand.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Jen. Luisa, do you want to add something?
Well, we brought medical supplies, right? So we had some, understanding, and the fact that like the list that I had gotten 2 years ago in terms of what was necessary were things like children's aspirin, really basic things. Should have given us, some idea of how bad it was. I will say personally, towards the very end, like the last day that I was there, I had kind of upset stomach, and then I had to go buy medical supplies. And the best that I could find was an imitation bottle of Tums, and I believe it was $24, which is like a ridiculous, it's an impossible amount of money for an average Venezuelan. I had it, right? Because I was able to figure out how to link my personal debit card through an app, and I bought it that way. But that gives you some idea of how ridiculous the situation is, how unfortunate really the situation is for people. Also, one of the things we learned about was on the impact of unilateral coercive measures on contraception, and how that's made it, $10 for a pack of contraceptives for a woman, again, for 10 US for an average working class Venezuelan woman is, again, it's an impossible amount of money.
Yes.
So we learned at the various places that we visited, we learned each step of the way was also some education for us in terms of how illegal sanctions have impacted people's day-to-day lives.
That's true. That's true. We that are here in Venezuela do not think too much. I mean, we think about the increasing prices. The increase in the price of things. But usually we associate it to the hyperinflation. In recent months, maybe for the last 2 years, we have been using more openly the dollar within the economy. And I believe that that have helped a little bit to ease the whole problem of changing prices every day. But now, I'm just, what you just said click on my head, because sometimes we also here in Venezuela, and I believe that's also, as you say, part of the sanctions or the result of the sanctions, that the prices of things that 2 or 3 years ago were relatively cheap in terms of dollars now are crazy expensive. And it's more dramatic, the whole thing, when you take into consideration that here in Venezuela, most of the people live with very low salaries. The public sector employees live with, I believe that is not more than $10 a month or something like that, if you include the whole package. Of course, there are differences between sectors, but anyway, and of course, many Venezuelans has been, learning to live with their salaries, and they have been learning to make something else and charge in dollar in order to live a little bit better. But anyway, the situation is complicated, and the prices even in dollars are sometimes crazy, as you just say about the sum that you bought, the imitation sums that you bought. That's crazy, $24. So anyway, I'm just going to jump to the third question, and it reads like this. What is your opinion about the criticism on the delegation coming from the extreme right individuals, but also coming from the left ones? And I asked this question because after your visit, we in Orinoco Tribune prepared like a piece with some things that we found out there that wrote Elliot Abrams and other people from the extreme left that organized some panels here and there. So that's what I'm asking the question.
Sure. Of course, there was that very small, but very, very vocal minority of people on each side. Overwhelmingly, overall, we had very, very positive support. Very, very positive support.
That's nice. That's nice. That's nice. Do you want to add something, Luisa?
Just, the extreme right. No, Elliot Abrams is not considering joining DSA. So whatever criticism they want to lodge against, that's fine. If anything, it made the trip better. And I will say the extreme left, when we get criticisms, those people they never leave. So, I'm glad that I was part of a group that got such an overwhelmingly positive response to something like our trip, right? And the fact that we were able to interact with leftists from all across the world. That's huge. The connections that we made, the conversations that we were able to have, and, visiting the communes and all of these community centers really was able to demonstrate to us what's possible, right? So I think most members understand that, and I think that's why we got such positive support.
That's nice. It's nice to hear that. Okay, now I'm jumping to the fourth question. Can you tell us about the political conformation within within DSA and how it empowers or delays the achievement of real socialist objectives within the US? And also within that same question, I ask, what do you expect out of the upcoming DSA convention that is scheduled for August, I believe?
Mhm. I'll start with the convention first. We have 94,000 members.
That's a lot.
Our convention is the highest decision-making body in the organization. We hold it every 2 years. We decide on the course of the organization for the next 2 years and beyond. We also elect our political leadership. It's important to understand that DSA is member-driven and member-funded. And that's something that isn't always familiar to people in the US. Like I said before, people are atomized under capitalism in the US, not used to flexing those communal muscles. It is also the case in the US that people generally not terribly politicized. But DSA, we meet people where they're at. We are a big tent. And because of that, it gives members a place to explore their tendency, whether that's like social democrats, anarchists, communists, anywhere in between. In DSA, we fight on many fronts. DSA chapters are the heart of the organization, and they do work that makes a direct positive impact in their communities. We don't focus just on one area. We do, like, sure, we fight on the electoral terrain, but we have many, many chapters across the country that participate in mutual aid, fighting for housing justice, Medicare for all, abolition, defunding the police, and all kinds, more and more and more. And I think that that makes us a much stronger organization, and that empowers us to achieve real socialist values in the United States.
Good
Yeah,
answer.
and
Thank you.
I would add, like, there's positive and negatives to the big tent, right? Of what could broadly be called the left in the United States. Obviously, our growth, a lot of it has to do with the visibility of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and that's not a bad thing. It's much the reason why we've grown so much over the last couple of years. But then, you know, kind of getting to your question, there's also limits to that, right? It limits one's imagination if the focus is on exclusively electoralism. And so that's where kind of the role of the chapter work that Jen talked about comes into play, because many are not focused on electoral work, right? Local chapters kind of reconcile what we're known for nationally by bringing it down to the local level. So, you know, again, part of why the trip was such a great idea and such a great experience is that we have a lot to learn in this regard. That's why visits to places like Venezuela and gatherings like the Congreso are so important for our political development as an organization, that we're still learning and growing as socialists. And so Venezuela, and I would say BSUV, we met with BSUV youth too. They talked about models that we were somewhat familiar with that have seemed to be successful. The same thing with, like, for instance, the way that the clap boxes were distributed. Obviously, that was a program that was developed under duress, right? There's the sanctions, and a lot of people were struggling. But nevertheless, those are still the types of systems that we could stand to learn a lot from.
That's true. That's true. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, and when I was writing the question that I just asked you, I was thinking that maybe there are more constraints in having such a wide political spectrum within DSA, but it's for your answer, Jen, I see very clear what you're trying to say in terms of that. It's true that if you can use that in your advantage if you focus on, as you say, on in committees and things like that. So it makes sense. But of course, I'm always worried about how to achieve socialism. But I know that in the US that analysis is more complicated than the analysis that we might be doing here in, here in Venezuela or in other countries. But let me go to the last part of the question. What are your expectations about the convention?
Because it's, like I said, it's the highest decision-making body. I don't know if I feel comfortable, making that assumption.
Okay.
We have close to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Luisa, close to 40 resolutions and bylaws amendments. There's rigorous debate about each of them, but I don't think we're going to know until we get on the floor of the convention and people openly debate and make their voice heard. So I think that, one thing that we're doing differently this time is developing a platform for DSA. That's something we haven't had before. We developed it, it's been written, multiple drafts at this point. Members can make amendments to that platform. And just like the resolutions, we'll debate it on the floor, and it'll set the tone for DSA, I think, over the next few years.
When you talk about platform, that means like an online thing or
I'm
the bylaws?
A platform document that says what we're about, what we believe as an organization, what we're fighting for as an organization, from very specific things to more broad topics. I really look forward to getting into the debates on the floor with people and hearing what they have to say. People are, of course, on Twitter and elsewhere talking about it now, for better or worse. But I'm really, I feel very hopeful about our convention. I love DSA so much. It is a great organization, and I believe in it very, very strongly. And I take our big tent very, very seriously. And convention is the time to flex those muscles.
That's fine. So it's good to hear that. Do you want to add something, Luisa?
Well, I would add that I've been an activist for 10 or 12 years, I think about it. And so I've, started off in some of the smaller groups on the left. And at some point, I got into union work, and then I kind of decided that I'm not terribly interested anymore in having meetings with like 5 people in a basement. That I part of the reason why I joined DSA is to be able to expose myself to all those tendencies on the left. It's the same reason why I do labor work. I like talking to liberals. I like talking to people who have different perspectives. But there's plenty of opportunity to have those types of discussions, right? And so that's also the reason why, I spend so much of my time devoted to DSA. Again, it's just like you said, Jesus, it's very complicated. It would be a very long discussion to get into the circumstance of the United States and what, under what the scenario would be to see revolution. Again, I feel like we have the opportunity. We could be super duper right all the time, right, politically, but maybe that's not the best approach. Maybe sometimes we have to welcome people in who might be on the cusp.
I got it. I see your point. And I hope I wish you the best for the convention. Is that gonna be online? Is it gonna be, physical and in person? How is that gonna happen?
It'll be online. For the very first time ever, it's gonna be an online convention.
Okay. So it's more complicated that way, or not?
Yes. More complicated.
But I wish you the best. I wish you the best, and I recognize that DSA, as you said, is like one of it's the biggest progressive organization, socialist organization in the US, and I wish you the best because I really believe that the U.S. needs a change of approach, and the whole idea of the DSA having a lot of Jews within inside, I believe that, you know, open the door for optimism. So I really wish you the best, and I just want to let you know that here in Venezuela you have friends, and thank you for accepting the invitation. But anyway, I now we can jump to the second part of the interview, which is where you ask questions. You can ask questions about Venezuela, but also you can ask questions about independent media or something like that. Anything that you want to ask me.
So I'm curious, Jesus, what you would say to a DSA audience. What would your message be?
Wow, that's a complicated question. uh, as I told you, I consider myself, I'm not a party guy. You know, I'm not a member of the Communist Party. I'm not a member of the PSUV. I just happen to read a lot of Marxist books, and I consider myself a Marxist-Leninist. So in that sense, I would ask, I mean, it's a complicated question, Luisa. I would suggest the people from the DSA to keep fighting for a change in the US, to open your minds, to get rid of, to avoid following what you read or see in mainstream media, and try to ask yourself what is behind all those lines and all those things that you hear or see or you read in mainstream media about other countries like Venezuela, for example. But Venezuela is not alone. We have Cuba. I mean, in the same situation, you have Syria, you have you name it. I mean, the list of sanctioned countries is above 30, I believe. So it's like what, like 20% of the countries that are, you know, properly registered in United Nations. So most of those countries are satanized by mainstream media because we don't bend to US, you know, imperialism, to US orders, not because we hate the US. Because if you ask me, I don't have a problem with the US. I have a problem with the Washington elite, you know, that has been, you know, doing crazy stuff around the world to make the system work for them. But doing that, killing the opportunities for other countries to develop properly in their own way, in their own terms. So I believe that that's the most important, you know, words for a DSA member. I mean, to open your minds and ask yourself if what you are reading is the truth, and if there's not another truth to what you are reading about anything, because you have to learn that behind anyone writing something, and whatever you hear on TV is a script that someone wrote. So anyone writing something had a motive, and maybe they present it to you in a way that you believe is impartial. But the truth is that there's a lot of interest behind anything that is presented to you by mainstream media. So that's the thing that I was, you know, if you put me to talk in front of a lot of DSA members, I would suggest you to consider, to evaluate.
That's fair. I would say everybody has an agenda, right? But your agenda is either in favor of the working class, or it's in favor of elites, the 1%.
Exactly. And you have to be, I mean, careful about that. and you have to notice that someone might be trying to make you see one way, while in reality the best way for you, as for many of the people worldwide that are not in the 1% elite, is cooperate, is solidarity, is cooperation. You cannot, if you don't want to say socialism, you don't have to say it, but it's like building community. And that's what's something that I enjoy about the words that Jenn said, because it's true. I mean, in Venezuela is happening, that community building, that is a reality. It's not perfect, of course. I have to tell you, we have our issues also, but I believe that is happening. And with the sanctions and with the whole economic situation, that work that we initiated in 2003, 2005 has been somehow affected, but it is still there. And but another thing that I wanted to add is that in the US, I live in the US for almost 12 years when I was working as diplomat, as Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago. So I know a little bit about the US. And I have the impression that in the US, the community feeling, the community building thing is there. I mean, and I can tell you this based on my own personal experience and seeing how some communities organize themselves, some blocks in the US organize themselves to solve problems. That's a good example of, I mean, and those things happen in the US a lot. And also the consumer organization. I mean, you have a consumer organizations that help people know which product is better, which product is worse, and how to push towards a goal. I mean, there are a lot of signs within the US society that make me believe that in the core of the US society, there's the roots for community building, if you want to call it that way. I would call it socialism, but anyway, you know what I'm trying to say? I mean, it is there. You just have to, make it more visible and let people understand that the thing is already there, that we just have to make it better, perfectionate. I don't know how to say it.
That's certainly what we're trying to do in DSA, pull those little threads of community that we can find and develop them.
And they are there. They are there. Do you have any other question? Because your first question, Luisa, was terribly hard. No more
I'm
questions?
Curious,
okay.
I'm curious, like, how do the blockades, how do they affect you personally? If
That's
you
a
could
good
talk about
question.
that a little bit.
That's a good question. And I was about to interrupt you when you were talking, for example, about the sanctions. And in our case, in my personal case, sanctions affects me with internet interruption that affect us yesterday when we tried first to record the interview. That's, I mean, problems. That means problem with services, with utilities. I mean, internet is a problem. Electricity is a problem. In Caracas, it's not as bad as in the interior of the country, but we have problems of blackouts in a lot of cities in the interior of Venezuela, and we didn't have that thing, if you ask me, 5 or 8 years ago. So I consider that those things are direct results of US sanctions. The lines for gas. I mean, in 2020 is when we start, at least in Caracas, when we start seeing those humongous lines of cars in order to, to put gas on our cars. And lately, the problem has been increasing, disregarding the fact that some government officials say that they were about to solve the issue. I mean, you don't find the last 2 times that I've been trying to put gas on my car, I have had to pay in dollars. I mean, because since 2018, Venezuelan authorities decided, and I believe that was a wise decision, to set a subsidized price for gas, but also they opened the chance for people that wanted to pay in international prices. That means 50 cents per liter, which is something like what, like $2 per gallon. People can choose to pay in international prices if you don't want to do a line or something like that. And in my last 2 attempts of putting gas in my car, I have had to pay in dollars to international prices because I mean, they actually, I mean, the lines are incredibly long. So that affects us. I don't know how people are doing, but that there was also sanctions on the diesel, for example, which is not exactly gas. I mean, diesel in Venezuela is mostly used for trucks, and trucks are the main source of moving merchandise, food within the country. And a lot of people said that the prices were going to rise a lot, and thankfully that haven't happened, I believe, but because most of the truck companies has organized themselves and they have found ways to do their trips without too much affectation, but it's affecting the transport of food and things and products in Venezuela. So that affects us. So they are like what, already like 3 or 4 things that I told you that affect me directly. But of course you go to medicines and that affects medicine. COVID, for example, we have right now a problem. I believe that Venezuela is one of the countries that is lagging in terms of vaccines. And we haven't had do you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, and we haven't had the chance of getting all the vaccines that we want, and we pay for the COVAX system, that is a system that belongs to United Nations. We paid for like 11 million vaccines, and COVAX have not delivered those vaccines. And their excuse was that 8% of the whole payment that Venezuela paid way in advance was like blocked by the U.S. sanctions. But it explained a delay in the reception of vaccines, but those vaccines are not here there. And you, whenever you read what COVAX is and what Gavi, which is the administrative stuff behind COVAX, means, and you see that there are banks, international banks there, that you have big pharma there, you realize that there might be also the hands of the US, yes, delaying the delivery of vaccines for COVID-19 to Venezuela, which is crazy, is inhuman, is what the international lawyers call collective punishment. And that is crazy. You cannot make a whole population pay, like the Venezuelan population, just to make happy someone in Washington or the elite in Venezuela that just want Venezuela to be the same way it was for 40 years, since the 60s until the 2000. So it's terrible, but it's a reality. It's happening. So I believe that that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Luisa, and thank you, Jenn, for accepting the invitation. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish you the best. I just gonna give you like 1 minute for you to say goodbye or to add something else before ending the interview. Thank you again. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for having us here. Our trip was an amazing experience, and I learned a lot. I'm glad I had this chance to talk to you. Thank you.
You too. You too. Thank you, Jenn. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, and I would add that, whatever internal debate is happening within DSA. We are strongly anti-imperialist organization. So it is unquestionably the case that we do not, nor would we ever support sanctions against Venezuela or Cuba or any of the OPEC countries that just happen to make up the list of places that are under sanctions. So that is something that the Venezuelan people in Venezuela can count on us for.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you again. Bye bye.
Bye.